Uh, Hello everyone. So today I will be presenting about using the body to claim rights, study of embodied disability activism. So to start with, I want to clarify how the disabled body itself becomes a form of political agency. So throughout my four handouts and the lecture reading we did throughout the class, I saw a repeating problem that disability is often misrecognized, reduced to medical category, or viewed as something passive suffering. So what I want to study is how activism, especially embodied activism, disrupts these kinds of assumptions. And I also want to clarify how bodily protests uh, transforms public imagination and forces ethical and political considerations of what a true citizenship means. So I wanted to conduct this study because disability for most of my time throughout my life felt quite distant. And my reactions to public protests in Korea, especially by Chun Jang-young, also known as SADD in English, were shaped by something not positive and frustration rather than understanding. But the movie Wonder and readings throughout the class and my handouts kind of helped me change this perspective. And I realized that disability is not only a medical or social category, but more of a deeply embodied way of knowing the world. So the study is to understand activism more deeply and ethically so that I can recognize the true meaning of the embodied action. So why this study is worth doing? This study is worth doing because embodied activism shows forms of moral and political knowledge that mainstream society and the majority of society often ignore. So by studying embodied activism, we can rethink key ethical categories such as autonomy, dependence, and vulnerability, and understand disability through that. We should, of course, care about these issues because misrecognition of disability it leads directly to social and political injustice and discrimination. So how society understands and interprets disabled bodies, it really gives a big influence in policy, infrastructure, and the rights. So studying embodied activism can help our understanding of democratic citizenships and help us create more inclusive public institutions and policies. So this is my concept map, and I built my concept map by first identifying repeating themes across my four handout readings and the one we read together in class. And I noticed two parts that were repeated. First was the misrecognition of disability as something passive or tragic. And the second one was the reinterpretation of disability through activism and resistance. And so, as you can see at the top left is the reading that we read together in class, Agman's lecture reading, which talks about how personhood is embodied and relational. And this gave me the base foundation for seeing disability not as a medical problem, but as a meaningful way of being in the world. Next is Embodied Imagination by Mackenzie and Scully, who introduce moral imagination. And these two argue that imagination is rooted deep in the body, and that moral understanding requires us to take embodied perspectives very seriously. So this helped me see where misrecognition starts, since it begins with the failure to imagine disabled experience accurately. And moving on to next is Ethical Activism by Finn. So this concept math shifts from imagination to action. So Finn talks about that activism itself produces ethical reasoning, which is that disabled people generate moral knowledge through embodied political action. And this kind of became the bridge between misrecognition and activism. And now, moving on to the bottom row, the map shifts into more political forms of embodiment. So Loa 2013 Loa shows how the disabled body performs everyday resistance even outside formal protest, so that small actions such as occupying space, telling stories, moving around public areas become forms of micro-activism. And finally, the Poland 2019 study, which was my first handout, shows the most visible form of embodied action, which is public protest. And disabled bodies in protest reshape political communication by challenging who is allowed to be visible, who is allowed to be heard and recognized as an important public political subject. And the structure of the map reflects kind of my own learning process as well. So I moved from seeing disability as something distant or unfamiliar, like I mentioned, to understanding the disabled body as a source of ethical and something political. So this concept map makes this progression visible. So from misrecognition towards imagination, towards activism, towards resistance, and then towards political protest. So conceptual framework, what do I think is going on? So what is happening across all my sources is about how society understands the disabled body and how activists reclaim that meaning. Misrecognition leads to exclusion, but activism, especially embodied activism that we've been talking about, goes into deeper into public space to demand new ethical and political understanding. Next is about what guides me. So my framework is based on 5 theoretical perspectives, and the first reading that we went through together in class, Agman argues that personhood is embodied and relational. The next, Mackenzie and Scully proposes that moral imagination is not abstract, but it comes out through our everyday bodily experiences. And then Finn expands on that by showing that activism generates ethical knowledge. And then Loa demonstrates how disabled embodiment performs micro-resistance in everyday life, in our daily life. And the Poland 2019 study shows how protest reorganizes political communication by showing that disabled bodies at the center. So my personal experience supports this framework. So before taking this course, disability, I wasn't familiar with it. Luckily, my friends and family were very healthy, so it felt distant, and I misinterpreted disability activism, 전장현, the SADD, activism in Korea, something as an obstacle rather than political communication. And the reading helped me understand that embodied activism communicates ethical and political knowledge that the majority of society fails to recognize. So I will go on to my research questions. So in developing my research questions, I looked into the central theme that connected all 5 readings, and that was that body is not only something interpreted, but something that acts ethically, politically, and intellectually. So the first question is, how does disability activism expressed through the body challenge everyday assumptions about autonomy, vulnerability, and what it means to act as a normal person. So the first question asks how embodied activism reshapes ethical ideas like autonomy, vulnerability, and agency, and this comes from combining the main ideas from the readings of our class reading and Mackenzie and Scully and Finn's reading. So the second question is, how do disabled bodies in protest change the way political messages are communicated, and how do they push society to reconsider who gets to be seen and heard as a political subject? So the second question focuses on political communication, and that the Poland 2019 reading shows how disabled bodies in protest restructure how political subjects are recognized. Then the third question is, what kinds of knowledge become visible through embodied disability activism, and what does this reveal about the limits of non-disabled people's moral imagination? So the third questions about the knowledge production, and this brings together nearly all the readings in a single line of question. So I think each question opens to multiple sub-questions and raises critical thinking in an open-ended kind of way. So yeah, these are my research questions, and these will be my references. Thank you for listening.